The Ballad of Wyatt and Maria began not with the strum of a guitar, but with the cold clink of silver on a trader's ledger. Lobo Crossing, a town barely a stain on the map, was a place of frozen breath and desperate dealings. Wyatt, a man built of granite and ghosts, had no use for anything but flour and feed, yet his gaze as hollow as the winter sky landed on the last soul left in the stock pen. She was Apache, they said, and wild. Her name, he'd later learn, was Maria. Her spirit was not a thing to be broken, but a fire banked in the cold, unblinking glare. She returned to the men who had bound her. They called her worthless, but Wyatt saw something else. He saw the same loneliness that had haunted his own days since the earth took his wife and boy. He didn't buy her out of pity. Pity was a luxury he couldn't afford. He bought her because of the defiance in her eyes, a reflection of his own refusal to crumble. He held out 2 silver coins, the weight of a lifetime of unspoken sorrow, in his hand. The trader scoffed, but the coins were good. The rawhide was cut. Maria, with a dignity that a king might envy, rose on her own and walked out into the cold air. The wagon ride to his ranch was a slow, rattling journey through silence. He didn't look back. She didn't look at him. A wool blanket he tossed her was accepted without a word. Her eyes were fixed on the trail, a roadmap to escape if the need arose. He knew the look. He knew the fight. He had no intention of stopping her if she chose to run. When they reached his quiet homestead, the dog barked, then fell silent. He unloaded the grain, and when he turned, she was gone. He didn't call her name. He just left a plate of bread and beans by the hearth and waited, watching the dark woods, a knot in his gut tightening. 2 hours later, she returned, her bare feet raw from the frost. Her pride had pushed her far, but the cold had brought her back. She ate the food, her back to him, her shoulders hunched. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut, but it wasn't the tension of fear. It was the taut, stretched wire of 2 solitary souls, sharing a space, a truce with no words. Only the hiss of the fire. That night, she slept on the floor near the hearth, the blanket wrapped tight, and for the first time in 5 years, Wyatt felt the suffocating weight of his solitude lift just a fraction. The days that followed were a quiet dance of unspoken understanding. He didn't speak, and she didn't press. She swept the floors, he chopped the wood. The routine was a slow, steady pulse, and in it something new began to form. She noticed the nail on the floorboard and hammered it down with the heel of his boot. He saw it and said nothing, just stood a moment longer. She started sleeping on the cot, but the door stayed open. One evening, she pointed to the ridge where 2 stones stood against the sky. "Graves," he said. "My wife, my boy." She asked no more, but her silence was a language of its own. He left a simple dress for her one morning, and when he returned, she was wearing it. It was too big in some places, too tight in others, clinging just so to the curves of her hips. She caught him looking and turned away, a nervous tug on the fabric. He looked away too, not because of shame, but because he wouldn't be like the men who had stared at her before. He wouldn't own her. He wouldn't leer. He would simply be there. Later, she stood by him at the workbench and without a word began mending a torn saddle blanket. Her stitches were clumsy, but they held. It was the first time they worked side by side. Over dinner, she finally broke the silence. "Why me?" she asked. He chewed, swallowed, and looked at her. "You didn't beg," he said. She looked down, a flicker of something close to a smile on her lips, and finished her meal. That night, she didn't flinch when he walked by. The room was no longer just a house. It was a space no longer empty, no longer filled with just his grief. He didn't know it yet, but the ballad was gaining a second verse. The storm descended upon them like a shroud, a wall of white that sealed the world outside. The cabin became their entire universe, a small island of warmth in a sea of snow. The silence between them had a different quality now. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something shared. She was no longer just a woman in his home. She was Maria, and her stillness was a canvas he was beginning to see. That morning, she broke the silence first. "Where's your family buried?" Her voice was rough from disuse but steady. He looked toward the ridge, then back at her. 5 years, he said. She asked if he had anyone left. "Number." She set her cup down, pulled her sleeve lower. "I was traded away 2 winters ago. Twice since then. One man beat me. Another tied me for 3 days. She told the story flatly, a litany of torment, without a drop of self-pity. "They called me cursed for speaking out, for fighting back," she said, her jaw tightening. "I wouldn't kneel." He nodded once. I know. The kettle popped. The fire hissed. I stay because I'm not afraid here, she said, and that was all the declaration either of them needed. Later that day, they worked in the barn, a rhythm now settling between them. She handed him the tools before he asked. He knew when she was sore and gave her space. Inside the fire glowed. Wyatt lit 2 lanterns instead of 1. She stirred the stew, her movements still careful but no longer clumsy. He set a bowl for the dog. They were a family of 3, an old man, a fierce woman, and a limping dog, and the unspoken weight of that truth settled around them, a thick blanket against the storm. She sat by the fire, rubbing a sore ankle, the hem of her dress pulled up. He sat across from her, his eyes drifting. She noticed and she didn't hide. She watched his reaction, the lack of judgment, the quiet acceptance, and in that she seemed to find her answer. I thought you'd want what others did, she said quietly. That's not why I brought you here. He stood, took a thick shawl from the coat rack, and handed it to her. She wrapped it around her shoulders. Her hands brushed his. Neither of them moved away. The space between them had vanished. The next day she fixed a latch. He mended her boots. That evening she sat closer to the fire. No words, no touch, but the change was as clear as the rising moon. Later she approached him, her voice low. Will you show me how to say some words, she asked. He looked up, she touched her chest. Name he taught her, Maria. He pointed to himself, Wyatt. She repeated his name, her lips forming the sounds, and a warmth he'd long forgotten how to carry stirred in his chest. A laugh escaped her when she got a word wrong, a sound so rare he looked at her, truly saw her. The small scar near her lip, the curve of her mouth, and knew she wasn't just staying. She was choosing. He asked, do you want to stay? She looked into the fire. I stay because I choose, not because I am kept. He nodded. That's how it should be. The silence that followed was full, not empty. When she rose to go to the cot, her hand brushed his shoulder. She paused, and then she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his cheek. It was a kiss of gratitude, of trust, of a promise she had yet to speak. He sat there long after she was gone, the fire dying low, the memory of her lips burning warmer than the flames. He was no longer a man living beside a grave. He was alive, and she had done it with a single simple choice. The gray morning brought a stillness that felt like a beginning. The snow had stopped. Wyatt rose from the chair he'd fallen asleep in, his body stiff, and found Maria already awake on the cot watching him. The kiss from the night before was a silent question between them, a beginning that begged for a continuation. He put wood on the stove. She washed her face, put on the wool dress, and took the shawl from the chair, wrapping it around her shoulders as if it had always belonged to her. They worked through the morning, a rhythm now ingrained. The routine was no longer about survival, but about a shared life. In the lean-to behind the cabin, he found her with her hand on the lid of a small wooden chest. His wife's things. He stiffened, but she didn't open it. That was hers, he said. Maria didn't turn. You kept her things, he nodded. Didn't know what else to do with them. She looked over her shoulder, her eyes full of a wisdom he hadn't expected. Do you want me not to touch them? He shook his head. No, it's all right. She lifted the lid. Inside were shawls, a hairbrush, a Bible, a dried bouquet. On top, a photograph of a woman with light hair and a small boy with a crooked smile. Maria held the photo gently. Your son, he nodded. Micah, he was 6. Her breath trembled. I lost a brother to the river. He was 8. We never found him. They stood in a shared stillness, 2 souls bound by loss. Maria set the photo back. I won't take a space that belongs to her. You're not taking anything, he said with a certainty that startled her. I don't want to be a shadow, she said. You're not. He meant it. That night, they sat closer by the fire. He handed her a small comb, his wife's. She took it. You want me to have this, he nodded. She set it down, a silent acceptance. The neckline of her dress had slipped lower, but she didn't pull it up. He didn't look away. She didn't hide. Later, she stood by his chair. She didn't kiss his cheek this time. She leaned forward and touched her lips to his, a soft, slow, and sure touch. When she pulled back, their eyes locked. His hand lifted, and he gently touched her wrist. A second, no more. A silent acknowledgement. She turned and walked to bed. Wyatt sat there long after, his hand on his wrist, the fire dying low. For the first time in 5 years, he closed his eyes, not to forget, but to remember. Her choice to stay, The snow began to melt, and with it the quiet stillness of their world began to change. The rhythm of their lives was no longer just about survival. It was about choosing to be in the same place each day, about staying. Maria moved through the cabin with a sense of belonging. She spoke more English. Her laugh, once a rare sound, now came more freely. He didn't laugh back, but she saw the warmth in his eyes, a look that said he was watching her, choosing her just as she was choosing him. That morning she stepped outside the sun, a pale ghost behind the clouds. She wore the clean wool dress, now softer, its neckline slipping lower. She wasn't hiding anymore. Inside the barn, Wyatt turned from the feed to see her. His eyes settled on her, not with lust, but with a deeper, quieter appreciation. He saw the way the dress clung to her hips, the bare skin of her legs. But more than that, he saw the trust in her gaze, a trust born of countless quiet moments. "You said once this place was only for the dead," she said. He wiped his hands on a rag. "I did. It's not anymore," she said. He nodded. "No, it's not." She walked over to him, her fingers brushing the wooden stall. "Do you want me here, Wyatt, truly?" He looked her square in the eyes. "I wouldn't let you stay if I didn't. And if I did more than kiss you." A long silence stretched between them. His chest rose with a slow breath. He reached out his hand, not fast or rough, and touched her cheek. "I won't take anything you don't give freely." "I know that," she said, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Then I'm giving," she whispered. He lifted her slowly, gently. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, her body pliant and trusting. He carried her through the back of the barn, up the loft ladder. The old hay was dry, the quilts a ready bed. The dress slipped off her shoulder, her legs tangled with his, her skin scarred and soft pressed against his. They made love without rush, without noise. He touched her like she had never been broken. She held him like she didn't have to fight anymore. His hands didn't tremble. Hers didn't flinch. Afterward, they lay side by side, her head on his chest, his fingers in her hair. The snow began to fall again, light and silent. "You don't have to be anything here," he said. "I know," she whispered, "but I want to be yours." He closed his eyes, pulled her tighter. "You already are." They stayed in the loft until the sun dipped low. When they finally climbed down, she slipped her hand into his and didn't let go. That night she didn't go to the cot. She went to his bed. The fire burned long, and the silence between them fell whole. The days grew longer, the sun warmer the earth, turning soft beneath their boots. Winter was losing its grip. The ranch, once a place of silent grief, now hummed with life. Maria moved slower, now a hand often resting on her stomach. Her silences were no longer guarded but full. Wyatt noticed everything, the way her back stiffened when she lifted the kettle, the way her eyes followed his hand. She had come to him as a stranger, and now she carried their child, looking at him as if she had always known he would be the one to hold her. On the first clear day of May, he took her into town. She wore a new dress, a dark blue calico she had sewn herself. It fit her, a new skin for a new life. In town they were met with stares and whispers, but no one dared speak. Wyatt walked beside her, his hand always close to hers, a silent, unyielding shield. At the general store she chose fabric, her fingers running over the bolts of cloth like someone rediscovering the feel of dignity. A few women glanced at her, curiosity replacing judgment, and one offered a small, tentative smile. Maria nodded back. That evening back at the ranch, she laid the new fabric on the table, a future in her hands. She was sewing for the child, for herself. He brought her water, watched her work. Later on the porch, she leaned into him, her head resting on his chest. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. "Not after what they did. They didn't take you from yourself," he said. "You held on." She looked up at him. "You didn't fix me. I didn't try. That's why I healed." "When the stars came out," she whispered. "Do you want to marry me, Wyatt?" His hand tightened on her arm. "Yes," he said, "but only if you want to carry my name, because it's yours now. Not because I saved you." She turned to face him fully. "You didn't save me. You saw me. That's more." He stood, went inside, and returned with a simple silver ring, his mother's. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He simply offered it to her. She slipped it on her finger. It fit. That night they lay together, her back to his chest, his hand over her stomach. They spoke of names, of a garden, of a swing for the cottonwood tree. And when the fire died low, neither of them feared the quiet anymore. The woman once called worthless now lay safe, in a warm bed beside the man who never once asked her to bow. Her scars had not vanished, and his grief had not disappeared. But they had chosen to stay, and in that choice they had built a life, a real one, a shared one. The spring wind rustled the windows, and in the dark, with the knowledge of the child between them, it was clear she was never going to be sold again. She was home, she was his, not his property but his family.